Hey guys, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're doing a direct head-to-head hands-on comparison between the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition and the GoPro Hero 3 Plus Silver Edition. Now this is going to be great for anybody looking towards getting into the realm of compact action cameras they can literally mount anywhere. And or perhaps you're already existing GoPro owner of a previous generation and you want to see how the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition, the top tier GoPro, does against the $300 GoPro. And obviously this new GoPro is certainly priced quite high. It's $500. So let's see if it's really worth it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the video and see which camera is best for you. Now physically, when you take a look at these two cameras, you can see that they're pretty similar in terms of overall design and dimensions. They're pretty much identical in terms of those two factors. Cosmetically, the only real big difference from the front is that you have the Wi-Fi and recording LEDs in a different position, as well as a rearrangement of where you access the battery. Basically, on the GoPro Hero 3 Silver Edition, you access the battery from the back, and in the GoPro Hero 4, you access it from the bottom. Now, one massive improvement GoPro has made to the Hero 4 Black Edition is that now the side button on the camera both activates the Wi-Fi. If you hold it down for a couple of seconds, it'll turn all your Wi-Fi on and off. But if you just press it once quickly, it'll actually act as a mode button or a settings button where you can pretty much change the mode of the camera to go from video, stills, time-lapse, burst mode, and also change each of those properties in those different segments. Before, in the older series GoPro Hero 3 Plus, you had to funnel through a whole bunch of menus, and it literally took a forever for you to basically change a simple aspect of frame rate and resolution on either your photos or your videos. Here it's all in one menu. It's very quick to access and get out of and start shooting right away so you don't miss those important moments. Now the front displays on both of these two cameras is pretty much identical in terms of resolution and overall size. They're unfortunately not backlit, which is kind of a shame. I wish GoPro would add that feature in because I definitely desperately need it, especially doing nighttime stuff. Additionally, if you actually want a proper screen for your GoPro, you're gonna have to buy the separate monitor solutions. So that's an added attachment that you're gonna have to purchase from GoPro. But obviously, one of the best ways to review and pretty much control your entire camera is using the built-in Wi-Fi system. Now on the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition, you have both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, versus the GoPro Hero 3 Plus only has Wi-Fi capabilities. Now with that built-in Wi-Fi, what these GoPros will do is emit their own Wi-Fi network, so you can connect to it with your smartphone and use the GoPro app that's available both in the Play Store and on the App Store to basically control every aspect of your GoPro. You can change the internal settings in terms of what resolution you're recording your video at, and everything you can do in the actual camera you can do in the app. It's one of the best implementations of how to control a camera remotely I've ever seen. So it's really essential if you're basically wanting to know what you're actually doing in real time. Now there is a delay on the feed. The resolution is not great, but at least there is something there that you can universally connect to without buying any kind of monitor solution from GoPro. So this is essential if you don't want to buy that monitor. Now another big difference between the two is involving the battery and battery performance on the two cameras. On the GoPro Hero 3 Plus side, we have a 1180 milliamp hour battery, and the new GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition has an 1160 milliamp hour battery. And as you can see over here, in terms of battery performance, there is quite a big difference. Funny enough, the GoPro Hero 3 has an overall larger battery that delivers a lot better performance. If you're looking at 1080p at 30 frames per second, you're at least going to get 2 to 3 hours worth of battery performance versus an hour and a half at best on the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition. When you record 720p at 120 frames per second, you get about 2 hours 45 minutes on the GoPro Hero 3 and only about an hour and 50 minutes roughly on the Hero 4. Now 4K is obviously a new option on the Hero 4, and that's going to suck up more battery life. You're only going to get about an hour or so of battery life if you're recording 4K. And the other thing too is if you do record 4K, I do notice that the device gets significantly hotter than the GoPro Hero 3. So you don't want to be running 4K pretty much all day because that may do some damage in terms of overheating those chips, because 4K is certainly a massive resolution and it takes a lot of processing power to do, and the actual unit is very tiny, so there's not a lot of ventilation or active fans that can keep cooling the chips inside. But so it's really designed to be used in short bursts. Now moving on, let's talk about the actual stills performance of these two cameras. Now there is a big difference over here. Now the Hero 3 has a maximum resolution of 10 megapixels in terms of its stills capabilities. It has a maximum burst rate of about 10 frames per second, and in terms of time-lapse intervals, it can go anywhere between half a second to 60 seconds. Now, the stills capability on the Hero 4 Black Edition are quite extensive. Basically, your megapixel goes up 2 megapixels to 12 megapixels. Your burst rate goes up 3 times to 30 frames per second. Time-lapse interval will go all the way to 0 seconds, all the way up to 60 seconds. You have now a greater sensitivity for low light, so you can go all the way to ISO 800 and all the way down to ISO 100. Furthermore, if you're into some long exposure nighttime photography, you can actually open up the camera shutter for up to 30 seconds, which is absolutely insane. That's up to the level of what you'll find in most DSLRs. So you can really get some unique nighttime photography and some time-lapse capabilities with long exposure settings as well. It also has a spot meter, much like the older generation GoPro, as well as a brand new feature called Protune. And here you can control a whole bunch of dynamics that makes your image possible. So therefore you can actually control the white balance, change it to a specific Kelvin level to match your indoor or outdoor light, whatever lighting condition you're in. You can change the color profile itself from the standard kind of GoPro contrasty profile to a more flat profile if you want to do some color correction later on. You can change the ISO limit, you can change the sharpness, the shutter exposure, and even exposure compensation values. Now those are just specs and numbers and features. Let's take a look at the actual differences between these two cameras so you can actually see whether you'll find a difference to your eyes. Now overall, I have to say across the board, the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition definitely delivers better overall looking images. Now keep in mind that both cameras are shooting standard JPEGs, so there's actually not a lot of high bitrate photos that's happening over here. But what you can notice is that the dynamic range is certainly increased in the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition. But the big aspect that I think is a huge advantage is the Protune feature. And just to illustrate a good example, what we're taking a look at is just the standard GoPro picture profile that you find when you're just snapping a photo on the default setting. And here is what you'll look at if you actually change the setting to the flat picture profile setting, and you can basically even out all of the tones. Now it doesn't look good over here, but what you can do is take it into any of your favorite photo editing programs like Photoshop or Lightroom and basically configure the photo to your liking. Now obviously you can do this with standard GoPro images, but having a flatter profile definitely helps you maintain a more proper looking image in terms of holding more details in terms of highlight and keeping shadow information as much as possible, as well as manipulating the image to whatever you're liking. And overall, I think you'll achieve the best results if you shoot that way. Now, before we take a look at some footage off of the video functionalities of these two cameras, let's take a quick look at how they do in terms of audio. Now, the new Hero 4 has a couple of tricks up its sleeve in terms of audio. Not only does it have higher dynamic range, but it also filters out unpleasant frequencies that you typically don't need in most of your recordings. So what we're going to do now is an audio test between the two to see which one sounds best. Okay, so what we're now doing is a audio comparison test between the GoPro Hero 3 and 4. And what you're listening to right now is the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition, and you can see that the audio is quite similar to the GoPro 3. And overall, definitely not a huge difference. You definitely want to connect it to an external mic if you want really good audio. But there is a little bit better clarity and definition. It has a higher dynamic range than the GoPro Hero 3. But overall, not a huge night and day difference because you are still recording in the internal microphone that has a pretty low bit rate, but not the greatest microphone in the world, and especially not as good as one that you would have to plug in externally. And thankfully, the GoPro 4 has that option. Now, the silver edition of the GoPro Hero 3 Plus can record a couple of different options in terms of video. Obviously, you have 1080p that can record all the way to 24 to 60 frames per second. You can record 720p slow motion at 120 frames per second, as well as WVGA resolution at 120 frames per second as well. Now, when we take a look at the capabilities of the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition, the GoPro Hero 3 really looks like child's play. And as you can see over here, we have a ton of options. Basically, in terms of 4K capabilities, you can record up to 24 to 30 frames per second. You also have a brand new mode over here in 4K, which is the Super View mode, which increases your field of view by a couple of degrees, and you can maximally record that up to 24 frames per second, which is certainly usable. You also have 2.7K modes, both in regular and super view mode, as well as 1440p mode up to 80 frames per second. And the big one over here, which is 1080p, super view, and regular 1080p at 120 frames per second, which is pretty insane. You also have 720p at 120 frames per second. And if you do want the best slow motion capabilities on the camera in terms of highest frame rate, you're going to have to lower your resolution down quite a bit to WVGA resolution to get 240 frames per second capabilities. Now, furthermore, keep in mind that the video functionality, like the photo functionality on the Hero 4 Black Edition, is also Protune enabled. So you can adjust all those aspects in terms of ISO, color profile settings, white balance, all those things that we talked about previously in the stills mode. You have that capability, which is certainly a big asset to anybody who's going to do some color correction or is going to go in a situation they don't know how the lighting's going to be. You'll have a little bit more flexibility, both in terms of your photos and your video capabilities on the Hero 4. Now, one of the big new features that we mentioned before is the new Super View mode in 4K. You can also get the Super View mode in different lower resolutions, but in 4K it does look pretty glorious. And certainly when you're using this feature, you do definitely have a much wider field of view than you would typically have in the normal mode, or what you would typically find in the GoPro Hero 3 Plus. Now, certainly be warned that the wider you go on any of these cameras, the more you introduce lens distortion. It's just one of the factors of these cameras. Now, from a POV shot perspective, the lens distortion is not that apparent. You can correct it in software, but if you're going to do anything that requires minimum distortion in terms of using it as kind of a regular camera, not as an action camera, you are going to have some big troubles with it because it does distort the image quite a bit if you're using it on that super wide angle perspective. Now, let's talk about the resolution difference over here. Now, obviously, if you have a 4K monitor, you can watch this video in 4K. It is uploaded, so you can tell the difference between the 1080p and in 4K. Now, if you're not using a 4K monitor and you're still on that 4K setting, what you will notice is that everything in the frame, from the little dials on the speedometer to little faraway details, everything is extremely sharp, and it just has a clarity that is certainly not apparent in the 1080p version. I certainly can see that looking at the raw files themselves, and video compression on the internet will make it more difficult for you to see the difference between the 4K and the 1080p. But I'm telling you right now, there is a massive difference between the two, not only in terms of the overall color depth and dynamic range of the image, but the sheer details and the kind of perspective you get from that super wide angle view, with everything being super sharp and super clear, is certainly a tremendous experience, and really quite mind-boggling of how they can put this much camera technology into such a small form factor. Now, keep in mind, obviously, we're testing out the GoPro Hero 3 Silver Edition. The GoPro Hero 3 Black Edition definitely had better video capabilities, but I really wanted to test out something that was extremely reasonably priced to the highest end GoPro that you can get, to kind of determine whether you could go with the GoPro Hero 3 Plus versus the all-new GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition. And I have to say, overall, if you're wanting the best image possible, obviously you want to go for the best camera, and that's what the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition delivers. But in terms of most of your day-to-day things, you can definitely make by with the quality on the Hero 3 Silver. You do have a new Hero 4 Silver, which has a couple of different features that it shares from the Black Edition, but no proper 4K capabilities at a decent resolution that is usable. You're going to have to make do with kind of quad HD resolutions. But overall, I have to say that for the $300, the Silver is still worth it and still pretty comparable through most regards. Now, taking a look at some of the nighttime stuff, you do notice a big difference between the GoPro Hero 4 and the 3. Now, the 4 can do up to 6400 ISO in a different low light condition, and it automatically can bump up to that ISO setting. Obviously, there's still going to be a massive amount of grain, and to make this image half usable, you're going to have to either make it in black and white or do some kind of noise reduction software. But in terms of if you do need a better low light camera, obviously the Hero 4 is certainly a more capable low light camera, but it is certainly far from a good low light camera. Now, moving forward in terms of slow motion capabilities, obviously we both have 120 frames per second at HD resolutions. Now, the GoPro Hero 4 can do HD resolution at 1080p at 120 frames per second versus 720p on the GoPro Hero 3 Plus side. Now, in terms of looking at the overall quality, there's not a massive difference between the two. I think they both do a pretty decent job in terms of slow motion. Obviously, I would love to see 240 frames per second at high definition on the Hero 4, but that's unfortunately not available. You're going to have to bump it down to WVGA resolution, as you see over here, which definitely doesn't look good as HD, but if you do need that highest frame rate possible, at least you have the option to do even 240 frames per second on the Hero 4. But other than that, guys, that's really it. If you have any specific questions about anything I talked about in this video, please make sure to leave that on a comment down below. Overall, obviously, the GoPro 4, based on our test, the Black Edition, is certainly superior in pretty much every way from the Hero 3 Plus. Now, obviously, they have the Hero 4 Silver Edition, which has a number of the GoPro 4 Black Editions featured, but I think if you're going to spend the money, it's worth getting the full 4K at 30 frames per second capabilities, not to mention the 4K at the Super View mode at 24 frames per second. I think the Silver Edition doesn't have that, but it does have that screen, which is definitely a nice thing. It is an extra option to add the screen onto this. But overall, I think with if you're buying a camera right now and you want to have the future-proof ability to shoot proper 4K at 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second, I think this is probably the best action camera you can get in the market right now. Sure, it's not perfect. It doesn't have all the features you would ever want in an action camera, but it's certainly darn close to being perfect. So again, if you like the video, please make sure to give us a thumbs up. That really helps us out tremendously. Also, I have a full review of the GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition on our channel, so make sure to check back to our channel. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.